Hey, what's up guys? My name's Brett Bodkins and I wanted to do a review on the Nikon AFS 35mm 1.8G DX lens. Keeping in mind that this is a DX lens, it is possible to use it on a full frame with a little bit of vignetting. I'm going to show you a example of that at different aperture settings a little later in the video. Now I think the main thing to look at whenever you're looking at a 35 for a DSLR is if you're trying to shoot video or if you're only doing still photography, and that makes a big difference in what type of automatic focus system that you want to make sure you're using. When the DSLRs first came out, the automatic focus that they used was the screwdriver type, and those lenses, the D series lenses, they focus pretty well, but the focusing mechanism is quite loud compared to the newer AFS silent wave motor, and the newest system, the P series lenses, which use some kind of pulse mechanism. I'm not sure how that one works exactly, but as far as it goes, it is much quieter, and that's the ideal setup for video. So I think what you're looking at is to really decide your first decent prime lens that's inexpensive for a DX camera, and really most people are going to look at the 35 or the 50. And I think the 50mm, when you put it onto a crop body, they they give you a field of view equivalent of around 75mm, and that's a really nice setup. However, for general purpose photography, it's a little bit too telephoto, and you may benefit from going a little wider. 35 represents similar field of view to a 50mm lens, and it's a better general purpose field of view. So yeah, the question then becomes, which 35mm are you wanting to buy? And if you're looking to stay with the G series lenses, you really only have two options. That's going to be this one here, or the one that covers the full frame sensor, and the one that covers the full frame is a good bit more expensive than this one. There's also a 35mm f2 D series lens available that you may want to consider as well, but it does use the screwdriver autofocus system, so it's much louder focusing. Not really ideal for video, and I've heard mixed reviews on the image quality. So yeah, I'm going to go over a couple basic pros to this lens, and then we'll move on to some photo examples at different aperture settings, just so you can get a feel for the lens and how it renders. So one thing I really like about these lenses and any of the other G series lenses is the MA mode for the automatic focus, and that's pretty nice because it stays in automatic mode unless you grab the focus ring, in which case it'll let you take over temporarily until you hit the automatic focus again. So it's a pretty nice little feature, avoids having to switch manually between the two modes. And so that's pretty nice. And one tip is that if you're using the shutter release to trigger your automatic focus mechanism, it's not quite as helpful. You have to half press the shutter and then manually focus, and then you can shoot. Whereas if you disable that on the shutter release, you can set it to back button focus only, and then it becomes really convenient because then you pretty much only get automatic focus when you tell it to, and you can trigger the shutter anytime without any kind of extra steps in between. So I quite like back button focus. I'm sure that you guys have probably heard of that before. If you haven't, check it out. It's really convenient, and it makes that MA mode even more powerful. So another thing on my list of pros for this lens is the fact that it is very close focusing. You can get up to about almost exactly 1 foot away and get a focus, and so that's quite nice, especially if you have a decent megapixel sensor. You could crop in a little bit and get very close to a macro type shot out of a general purpose lens, which is quite nice. Another nice little feature is that it does have a metal lens mount. Not quite a big deal, but at that price point, it's a nice little feature. A lot of the plastic lens mounts tend to wear out, and so this should help you have a lens that'll last you a long time. So another nice thing that they did is they put 7 rounded aperture blades, and that does give you a more pleasing bokeh. And so then that way you can get those nice rounded out of focus areas in the image, rather than some sort of off shape weird hexagon shapes. Another nice little thing is that it does use the same 52 millimeter filter threads and lens cover that a lot of the other Nikon lenses use, so it just makes it more convenient as part of a system to have the same parts. It does include a hood to keep out glare and flare, and that also can improve contrast in certain situations. So I only have a couple cons for this list. The first one is that there's no hard infinity stop. The focus ring just keeps turning, so it's really hard to know when you hit infinity focus, and I dislike that. As someone that owns a couple of the manual focus lenses, it's really nice to be able to just have a hard stop and it ends right there and you know exactly where it's set to. Another thing they left out on this lens that I'm not surprised about, but I always dislike, is when there's no focus distance scale. It's nice to have an idea of where it's focused at, whether you're using it for zone focusing or some other instances where it's just really useful. So with no further ado, I'm going to get on to the images. Keep in mind that I'm not an incredibly technically minded person. I'm just going to show you the images, let you decide for yourself if you like the way they render or not. Being that this is a wide aperture lens, and that this focal length is covered with my kit lens, I generally only put this lens on when I need low light situations or if I want a shallow depth of field. So keeping that in mind, most of these images to start are all going to be wide open or something near to that. That said, I do have a few images shot at other apertures, and I will show you those images in sequential order, and you can just sort of make up your own mind on whether or not this lens fits the way you shoot, or if you like the way this lens renders or not. Also, I generally stick to landscape photos, so this type of photo is not really necessarily what I know, and so I'm sure you guys can take better photos than I can on that. Okay, so the last thing that I wanted to show you here, I did say that the lens, even though it's meant for a crop sensor body, it does have the ability to cover most of a full frame sensor, and you will get some vignetting depending on your settings. When you're close focusing, you see less of the vignetting than you do when you have it set to infinity focus, for example. And so you know, the images get worse that way, and they also get worse the more narrow the aperture setting. So you know, your worst case example is the f/22 and at infinity focus, whereas your best image would be at 1.8 and, you know, with a close focus. That said, exposure also makes a difference in the way that the vignette shows up. The higher key images tend to show the vignette less, so that's another variable. But you know, these are shots of just a blank wall, and so, you know, in real life shooting, you know, this will not be nearly as obvious. The vignette may be, you know, nice for the image depending. And also, it is possible that, you know, you go in with a lens correction and post-processing, possibly a little bit of vignette control, and if you do that, you can get some pretty good images. Worst case scenario, you crop a little bit and you have somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 millimeter image, versus if you go into the full crop mode on the full frame camera, it will crop in a good bit more than that. So it's a pretty useful lens, and for the price, you know, you can definitely use it for a while after switching to full frame if that's something that you wanted to do. It is possible to just use it. So anyway, hopefully this video helped you out and you can kind of make up your own mind on the lens itself. So I will be testing some other 35s in the future because I really want a lens that I don't have to worry about the vignette on a full frame. And so once I have some comparisons and stuff, I'll come back to you with a comparison video of different 35s and let you know which one I ended up settling on. So anyway, hopefully this video helps you guys out, and take care. Happy shooting.